Overlord Volume 4 Chapter 4. Chapter 4. The Dawn of Despair. Part 1. Kozitus's footsteps were heavy as he plodded towards the throne room. It seemed to be contagious, because the tread of his vassals behind him was slow and ponderous as well. The reason for that was because he had lost against the lizard men. They had led the forces of the Nazarick into battle, and it had ended in defeat. Kozitus personally thought quite highly of the lizard men. Having been created as a warrior himself, Kozitus had a deep respect for excellent warriors. However, this was something else entirely. Nazarick could not be permitted to suffer a defeat. In addition, this was not a defensive battle, but their first campaign into the outside world. Anyone would be upset that such a glorious first battle had ended in ignominious defeat. It was true that his forces were inadequate. That made him recall Demiurge's words. However, that was merely an excuse. Even if his master had considered the possibility of failure, it would still be better to win. Soon, he saw the room before the throne room, the lesser key of Solomon, Lemegeton. His steps grew heavier, to the point where onlookers might think he had been hit by some kind of spell. Kozitus did not mind if his master reprimanded him. He had already prepared himself to be slain or ordered to commit suicide in order to erase the stain of his dishonor. What Kozitus feared was disappointing his master. What should he do if they were abandoned by the soul-removing Supreme Being? Kozitus considered himself to be a sword. He was a sword that was wielded by his master, that cut obediently when swung. Therefore, the most frightening thing he could imagine was to be deemed useless and unhelpful. Worse still, how could he make it up to the other guardians if they were cast aside as well? They will never forgive me if things get that bad. Not even my life will be enough to atone. And also, if the master is disappointed and leaves like the other supreme beings, what should do? Kozitus trembled. He was immune to cold, so the shuddering was not due to an external source but an internal cause. Had Kozitus been a human being, he would have started vomiting under the tremendous mental pressure that filled him. No, that cannot be. Ainsama would never abandon us. He was the soul-removing Supreme Being in the Great Tomb, after all the others had left. He was their supreme overlord, and their absolute ruler. How could such merciful master abandon us? He tried to console himself with that thought, but deep in his heart, a quiet voice of denial said that such a thing was not impossible. He reached the Lemegeton. Under normal circumstances, there would be nobody here besides the surrounding golems and the crystal monsters. However, there were many beings present. Specifically, they were Demiurge, Aura, Mare, and Shaltir, along with their hand-picked high-level vassals. Their eyes rested on Kozitus, and his guilt caused panic to briefly flash across his face. This was because he felt like everyone was castigating him for his failure. Or no, Kozitus felt that they might be blaming themselves instead. The thought from just now crossed his mind once more. Who was to say that they might not feel the same way? Upon closer inspection, he found that there was no sign of rebuke in their eyes. Forgive my lateness. Even Demiurge, who was on distant assignment, reached here before me. Think nothing of it. There is no need to apologize for such trivial matters. Demiurge spoke for the others. His tone was as calm as ever, with no hint of any negative emotions within. However, Demiurge was a guardian who was adept at scheming, skilled at manipulating emotions, and concealing his true feelings, so Cositus could not tell if he was truly displeased or not. From that point of view, one could say that Demiurge's state while spectating the battle between Ains and Shaltir was quite a rare thing for him. Granted, that was a display of the depths of his devotion. I've already informed the other guardians, but I'll be taking Albedo's place as the overseer this time round. Are there any objections? No. Everything will be fine if you're in charge. Albedo was not around because she was accompanying her master in Sabasa's place. Good. Then, once everyone is here, we will proceed to the throne room together. However, since Albedo is not here, I'd like to sort out the order in which we show our respects. While this sort of thing should be rehearsed beforehand, there is no time for that now. I shall thus give a verbal explanation to speed things up, so please pay attention. The guardians and their servants indicated their understanding, but despite that, Cositus had a question. All the guardians were here, so who exactly were they waiting for? However, his questions were answered once that person showed up. Cositus sensed the presence of a living being moving towards this place. As he looked in that direction, he saw a heteromorphic creature floating in mid-air towards the Lemegeton. It resembled an infant, no, perhaps an embryo might be more accurate. It had a long tail, and its body was bright pink. It had an angelic halo around its head, and a pair of withered, featherless wings on its back. It was roughly 1 meter long, and it was slowly heading this way. Who's that? Demiurge answered Aura's question. He is Victim, guardian of the 8th floor. So that's Victim. Victim reached the Lemegeton, and then turned a full circle. Cositus had the feeling he was looking around. Since Victim had no neck, he had to turn his entire body to look around him. Keksearp, SBUDESOHTKCEHC. How do you do, everyone? I am Victim. Demiurge seemed completely unfazed by Victim's peculiar manner of speech, and responded on everyone else's behalf. Welcome, Victim. I am Demiurge, and I am taking Albedo's place for this meeting. Krelk nabedagwolafo ec narepari htdna, garpmadfo amsiriki ht uoy. I heard about that from Ain-sama. After saying that, Victim turned his entire body to regard everyone once more. Noises Dugidamainama rof ratfeldnabsuh remrof rayhwdnats red new ilify. 2o dna edisni htob evit kartanusi notfu an error. I know about everyone, so I hope you'll understand if I ask that we dispense with the introductions. Is that so? I see. Then, since we're all here, I shall explain what I was just talking about. Everyone paid close attention to Demiurge's explanation, because they would soon be meeting their Supreme Master, Ain-sama, in the heart of the great underground tomb of Nazarick. The slightest mistake might well be punished by death. After he finished speaking, Demiurge gave everyone some time to digest what they had heard before he led the guardians and their vassals into the throne room. Cositus's heart soared as he stepped into this room, which he had only entered a few times before. With its outstanding construction, the flags which represented the supreme beings and the world-class item in its depths, this room truly deserved its name as the heart of Nazarick. The spectacular display before him allowed him to briefly forget the torment within his soul. Along the way, the guardians left their vassals behind and formed a line at the steps before the throne. Then, they saluted the guild emblem of Ain-Zulgaun which hung upon the walls as a sign of their respect and loyalty. After that, they genuflected with heads lowered, awaiting the arrival of their master. Soon, the sound of heavy doors opening came from behind, and a pair of footsteps made their way into the hall. Needless to say, it was not the sound of their master, because the owner of the great underground tomb of Nazarick would never move unaccompanied. A warm welcome for Ainzul-Gaon-sama, Supreme Overlord of the Great Underground Tomb of Nazarick, as well as Albedo-sama, Guardian Overseer. That voice belonged to Yuri Alpha, of the Pleiades. They could hear the doors opening once more, and this time there was the crisp sound of booted feet and a staff tapping against the ground. It was followed by that of high-heeled shoes treading across the ground. Normally, when their master entered, they should have bowed to show their respect for him. However, nobody present did so. That was because they had already demonstrated their utmost respect. However, that was not the case for Cositus. The unease that filled his soul manifested in his body as a physical movement. It was a tiny thing, but it greatly influenced the mood in the air. Through the use of a skill, Cositus could sense the other guardians shifting their attention to him. Albedo, walking behind her master, was also radiating an anger that she was trying in vain to suppress. However, nobody dared to speak under these circumstances. The footsteps slowly passed around the line of guardians, ascended the steps, and then reached the throne, whereupon it ended in the sound of someone sitting down. Albedo's voice then echoed loudly through the throne room. You may raise your heads to gaze upon the glory of Ainzul-Gaon-sama. The assembled guardians looked up, the sounds of their movement perfectly coordinated to their master who was seated on his throne. Cositus also raised his head immediately. There, he saw the supreme ruler of the great underground tomb of Nazarick, the supreme being whose staff of office was wreathed in a dreadful aura, backlit by a mysterious black radiance, Ainzul-Gaon. Before him stood Albedo, who cast her gaze down on the mass guardians, including Cositus. Satisfied with what she saw, she nodded, and then turned to Ainz-sama, the guardians of Nazarick are gathered before you. Please bestow your orders upon us. Ainz went, in deep, regal tones, before thumping his staff heavily upon the floor. The gesture drew everyone's attention, and then Ainz slowly spoke. Welcome, you guardians who are assembled before me. Now then, I shall first convey my thanks. Demiurge. Yes. I have called upon you every time something came up. Well done. Thank you for your loyal service. Oh, your praise is too lavish, Ainz-sama. I am but your humble servant. It is only natural for me to appear before you whenever I am summoned. That requires no thanks. Demiurge bowed deeply. He seemed to be trembling in delight. Is that so? That's right. Has anyone suspicious appeared on your end? No. I have been very careful, and it should be easy to detect anyone who approaches. That's good. However, do not allow yourself to grow lax. After all, our enemies might come up with a way we have not anticipated. In addition, there's the matter of the skin you have brought me. According to the head librarian, it can be used to make low-tier spell scrolls. Can you ensure a stable supply? Yes. There will be no problems at all in that respect. We have already captured an adequate quantity. Really now? Then, what were those beasts called again? Beasts. The beasts of which you speak, Ainz-sama. Demiurge paused briefly to think, and then continued. They are two-legged sheep from the Holy Kingdom. What do you think of the name Abelian sheep? Demiurge's joyful tone puzzled Cositus. Demiurge was fundamentally a good-tempered, possibly even compassionate person. However, that was only where his fellow creations of the Supreme Beings were concerned. He was extremely cruel to everyone else. One could glimpse shades of that cruelty under his good-humored facade. While his deeply seated malice ought to have been directed at the aforementioned beasts, would he really refer to unintelligent creatures with such an attitude? Given Demiurge's personality, something seemed off. However, now was not the time to inquire further. "I see. Sheep, then." Their master seemed amused, which in turn put a smile on Demiurge and Albedo's faces. "While I think goats would be better. That name will do. Then, skin those sheep by all means." Will excessive capture affect the local ecosystem? I doubt it. In addition, the use of healing magic allows us to skin them again. Therefore, we will not need to capture them en masse if we do not engage in large-scale production. That too is thanks to the monsters called torturers. Don't severed body parts vanish when healing magic is applied? About that, we have learned something during our experiments with healing magic. Once some great change has occurred to the severed body parts mincing, for example, those parts will remain. In other words, once the flayed skin has been processed, the healing magic no longer recognizes it as part of the body, and it will not vanish even when the source is healed. This is also why they will not die when they are fed meat. Also, this is not exactly related, but when either the healer or the healed one rejects the magic, it will not be able to operate properly and will leave a scar. Similarly, lower-tier spells are more likely to leave scars as time passes. I see. Magic is quite impressive. Very well, carry on, then. Understood. I shall begin harvesting them according to age and gender. Once that is done, could you tell me which age of skin is most suitable? I will let the head librarian handle that. Next, victim. T4STNAP, TIFGNIHGUOC. Yes, Ain-sama. Quote. I have summoned you here for only one reason. If something unexpected happens, I may need you to protect us and the other guardians with your skill. I apologize for that, and I promise I will resurrect you immediately. I hope you understand. Reta BHT. SSARGOT20 Tupper or NUZHTDNA. UOYTNAWTNOEW, UOY Wonk TNOEW, Niasni Alpo Page SITIRB Fo Y Tiro Jam EHT Fo Flahab No KZITAHT Ekna Difnik HTIW Yars NACIDNA, LL8 RBO JSIHT NY Committee Gel on Ever UOY, RIS. Eterocha torpor nahtrum nitanoti decaderi ceerg nisavu, revo kutu oy eknus tub. YRTNUOC nonor HCUM a tub CHCIHW, muigleby morphy MOCUOYS uaseb start sparep, setats noiten fo echnie 6 EHT fo TPCNOCYREVHTRF nitwala everot repa UOY. Demiurge has already told me about that. Please do not worry, Ain-sama. After all, I am also your servant. In addition, the goal of my life is death, so there is no greater joy for me than to aid the supreme beings in even the slightest of ways. Is that so? Still, forgive me. Victim gasped in surprise as he saw his master bow to him. There was a look of bewilderment and shock on his face. Isa PHTYB Ray Bhagti SUJ. I would not dare. Quote. If special circumstances arise, we may need to kill you in order to keep the foe from escaping. Even in that case, I hope you will accept that we are not killing you out of malice. You are one of my beloved children and I do not wish to hurt you, but we may all suffer if we let an unknown enemy be. No fera mirasem. SGNIHT Rato DNA Srelokfo SG Nuts SSELG 9 IEMST EZNACUOYSA El propio rabbinic Reiko noitere nagiag hcaepynoephcaep nirgulb, esan arpej ro sani hc niekal sdaernaichcone akaf smich of tahw fo elpmers a csiht. There is no need to explain, Ain Sama. I am fully aware of your intentions. Quote. There is a phrase used in one of Nazarik's mechanisms. It goes, greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. That phrase describes you perfectly. Thank you for your love. Ains's gaze moved from the guardian who had pledged his loyalty to the death, and shifted to another guardian. Next, Shaltia. Shaltia's shoulders trembled. She had not expected she would be called, and her reply seemed abnormally high-pitched. Why yes. Come to me. Unlike the other guardians, Shaltia was the only one who had been summoned to her master's side. She rose to her feet, both surprised and panicked. Her unease was clearly apparent from her back, and she looked like a condemned criminal being sent to the chopping block. Still, she held her head high and thrust out her chest, as though she were walking to glory. After ascending the steps, Shaltia immediately genuflected a short distance before the throne. Shaltia, I wish to speak of the matter which coils around your heart in thorns. As her master spoke those words, Shaltia immediately knew what he was talking about, and her face filled with shame and guilt. Ain Sama. Please hand down your punishment. I am a guardian, but still I committed such a foolish mistake. Please give me the harshest punishment possible. Shaltia's anguished wail echoed through the throne room, and Cositus found himself empathizing with her. No, any guardian, in fact, anyone who was made by the supreme beings, would be able to understand how she felt. Even if she had been mind-controlled, she could not forgive herself for turning her lance on the supreme beings. Really now? Then, Shaltia, come over here. As she saw her master beckon her over, Shaltia slowly crawled towards the throne. Ains extended a bony hand to Shaltia, whose head was bowed before the throne, and gently caressed her head. Ains Sama. Shaltia ventured as she nervously lifted her head, almost scared to death. That failure was due to a miscalculation on my part. In addition, you were dealing with a world-class item, which meant that you were at a great disadvantage. Shaltia, I love all of you who serve Nazarik loyally, you who were created from nothing. That includes you as well. Do you wish to force me to punish you, who bears no sin, and whom I love? The master shifted his gaze, as though he felt uncomfortable. Cositus had no idea where his master was looking, but he seemed to have spoken quietly. His master's face was skeletal, so there were no lips he could read, but he had probably said someone's name. Oh, Ain Sama. You actually said you loved me. Shaltia's moved voice echoed through the hall. Cositus was behind Shaltia, so he could not see her face. However, her attitude said everything. Her voice sounded choked up, while her shoulders twitched. He could see his master's other hand gently caressing Shaltia's face. It was holding a white handkerchief. There, Shaltia. Don't cry. It'll spoil your beauty. Shaltia did not answer. She simply pressed her face, probably her lips, to the back of the hand stroking her hair. Mare and Aura were already shedding tears. Demiurge too dabbed at the corner of his eyes. Cositus was somewhat envious of those people who could cry, and he looked longingly at the backs of his utterly loyal colleagues. What Shaltia feared most was to be deemed useless, a troublemaker and disloyal, and then abandoned by the final, merciful supreme being who had remained with them. However, her master thoroughly obliterated that unease. He did so with the word love. How happy must Shaltia be now? As someone in the same situation as her, no, his own situation was worse. Cocytus could only watch her back silently, with unbridled jealousy in his eyes. Then, Shaltir, you may leave. Ain-sama. A cold voice interrupted her master's words. Cocytus glared angrily at Albedo for her disrespect. And then, a thrill of dread ran through him as a wisp of unease curled through his heart. The meting out of appropriate punishment and reward is the way of the world. I feel she must still be punished. Albedo, do you to dispute my desi? Her master's words trailed off. He must have been left unable to speak by some reason about which Cocytus knew nothing. In the end, it was Shaltir's words which swayed his final decision. Ain-sama, I agree with what Albedo said. Please punish me as you see fit. The chance to fully express my loyalty would delight me as well. I understand. I shall do so after deciding on the appropriate form of punishment. You may return to your place. Yes, Ain-sama. Shaltir descended down the stairs, her already red eyes are made even redder. She returned to her original position, and bowed with a matchless devotion to her master. And then, Cocytus, Ain-sama has something to tell you. Pay close attention. The air filled with tension. It was his turn now. Cocytus's head was bowed very low. While that posture, which only allowed him to see the floor, was a clear display of respect, Cocytus had done so because he lacked the courage to look directly at his master. I have seen your battle with the lizard men, Cocytus. Yes. It ended in defeat. Yes. The blame for that failure lies with me. Please accept my sincerest apologies, and pray you will allow me to. The sound of the staff striking the ground interrupted Cocytus's apology. Then, Albedo's cold voice made his hearing organs tremble. You are being very rude to Ain-sama, Cocytus. If you wish to apologize, do so with your head raised. Forgive me. He raised his head and looked upon his master, who was seated at the top of the stairs. Cocytus, what do you have to say as the general of a defeated army? How do you feel, given that you did not take the field and merely acted as a commander? Am deeply remorseful for my inability to achieve victory, even after receiving command of my own troops, and for the loss of the elder lich commander that you personally made. Ain-sama. You can get undead like that from just about anywhere, so it's hardly a shame. There's no need to worry about it, Cocytus. What I want to ask is how you felt when commanding a battle. Let me get this out of the way first. I do not intend to blame you for this defeat. The guardians and the vassals behind him were confused by those words, with the exception of Albedo and Demiurge. So Demiurge was right. Oh. Cocytus sensed his master was about to continue speaking, and hurriedly refocused on him. After all, anyone can fail. Even me. The air in the throne room turned uneasy. How on earth could the supreme being Ainzulgaon fail? In fact, he had never once made a mistake up till now. In other words, he was only saying this to comfort Cocytus. However, the question is what you learned from that battle. Put in a different way, what do you think you should have done to win, Cocytus? Cocytus began thinking in silence. He now knew what he had to do to win, and so he spoke freely of his own deficiencies. Underestimated. The lizard men should have been more careful. Just so. No matter how weak your opponent is, you can't look down on them. I should have let Nabril see that battle too. Is there anything else? Yes. Did not have enough information from this battle. Learned that my chances of victory would be slim if did not know the enemy's strength and the terrain. Very good. Anything else? The commander was inadequate, since the troops in the field were low-tier undead. Should have accompanied them with commanders who could adapt to the circumstances and issue timely and accurate orders. In addition, after considering the lizardmen's weaponry, should have attacked with the zombies to tire the foe, or at least kept the troops together and attacked all at once. Is that all? My deepest apologies, but that is all can think of for now. There is no need to apologize. You have said nothing wrong, and that was an excellent analysis. Of course, there is room for improvement, but you seem to have learned quite a lot. In truth, I hope that you would not have to consult others and discovered those flaws on your own. But that is still acceptable. Then, why did you not do all those things earlier? Did not think of them. Felt that could overwhelm them with my forces. I see. However, you did think of them after the undead were destroyed, no? Very good. As long as you can improve yourself and avoid future mistakes, then there is meaning to this defeat. Cositus sensed that his master was smiling. There are many kinds of failure, but yours was not of the lethal kind. All the undead save the Elder Lich were automatic spawns. Their destruction does not affect Nazarick in any way. Rather, if they enabled a Guardian to learn something and avoid future errors, then this failure is actually quite a bargain. Thank you very much, Ainsama. However, the fact is that you were defeated. Thus, you must be punished like Shaltia. At this point, his master fell silent. This brief interruption made Cositus uneasy as he waited for his master to pass judgment. That said, he was greatly relieved now that he knew that he had not disappointed his master. However, what he heard next made Cositus freeze up. I had originally planned to have you retreat and act as a rear guard, but I think it'll be better this way. Cositus, you will personally erase the stain of your shame. In other words, you will exterminate the lizard men. This time, you are not allowed to call on anyone else for help. If they annihilated the lizard men and kept word from getting out, then this would not count as a defeat for Nazarick. Those who viewed everyone outside Nazarick as inferior life forms would gladly accept this duty, wiping away their shame and that of Nazarick with slaughter. Indeed, if this had been the Cositus from earlier, he would have accepted this order without hesitation. However, Cositus shuddered. This was because he knew what that order meant. He breathed in and out several times. Just as everyone began wondering why Cositus had not responded to his master's command, he finally spoke. Have request. Ainsama. The world seemed to stand still as everyone's attention rested on Cositus. Cositus was a guardian, one of the most powerful and highest-ranked beings of Nazarick. There were scant few people who were in his league, but even someone like himself felt a chill run through his entire body. While regret stamped through his heart like an avalanche, it was too late now. Since he had said it, there was no turning back. Cositus had compound eyes and thus a very broad field of vision, but from his bowed posture, he could not see his master's face. That was the only solace he had. If his master displayed any anger or displeasure, Cocytus would be trembling so hard that he would not be able to do anything. "Please, hear me out, Ain-sama." Before his master could respond, someone else interrupted Cocytus. "How dare you!" It was Albedo. Her deafening shout roared like thunder, filled with the gravitas which befitted the guardian overseer. Cocytus shuddered, like a child being rebuked by his mother. "What right do you have to ask anything of Ain-sama after starring the glory of Nazarick with defeat?" The audacity! Cocytus remained silent. He was determined not to raise his head until his master acknowledged him. He would remain as he was even if Albedo hammered him with the full force of her wrath. "Hurry up and..." However, a calm male voice dispersed Albedo's roar like mist in sunlight. "It's fine, Albedo," his master repeated himself, to soothe the shocked Albedo. "Raise your head, Cocytus. Could you tell me your request?" There was no anger in that even voice, which only made it more frightening. The fear Cocytus felt was akin to seeing the bottom of a clear lake and knowing that one was about to be sucked in. Cocytus's equipment granted him resistance to fear and mind-affecting effects originating from external sources. Therefore, the fear assailing him now sprang from within his own heart. After gulping, to be precise, it would be like swallowing a mouthful of venom. Cocytus slowly raised his head and looked at his master and ruler. Points of bright red fire danced within the empty orbits of his eye sockets. "I say again, can you tell me your request?" He could not speak. He had tried several times, but the words caught in his throat and nothing came out of his mouth. "What's wrong, Cocytus?" A weighty silence filled the air. "I am not angry at you. I merely wish to know what you are thinking, and what you are asking." His tone was gentle, as though trying to placate a quiet child. In the face of this, Cocytus finally managed to speak. "I oppose the extermination of the lizard men, and I beg that you will show them your mercy, Ain-sama." After that simple, direct statement, Cocytus thought that the air was trembling. No, it was actually trembling. The greatest source of that came from in front of him, from Albedo's murderous intent, followed by the quailing of the other guardians' hearts. In contrast, Demiurge and his master seemed as calm as still water. "Cocytus, do you understand what you are saying?" Albedo's frigid, murderous tone made Cocytus shudder, despite his immunity to the cold. "Ain-sama ordered you to exterminate the lizardmen to expiate your sins, but you would deny his will, as the guilty party. Cocytus, guardian of the fifth floor, are you afraid of the lizard men?" She sounded like she was mocking him, but Cocytus could not retort with anything. Albedo's attitude was only to be expected. If he were in her place, Cocytus would most likely be quite angry too. "Why don't you speak?" What silenced Albedo was not the sound of speech, but the sound of a collision. It was the high-pitched impact of a staff against the ground. "Be quiet, Albedo. I am asking Cocytus a question. Contain yourself. My deepest apologies. I beg your forgiveness." Albedo bowed in apology and returned to her previous location. Cocytus's master turned to transfix him with a keen gaze. There was no reading his expression. He looked like he was brimming with anger, but at the same time he appeared quite bemused. "Then, Cocytus, does that request of yours hold any benefit to the great underground tomb of Nazarick? Tell me." "Yes. In the future, they might breed mighty warriors. Therefore, it would be a shame to wipe them all out right now. Your servant submits that it would be better to instill strong sense of loyalty among them, so that when stronger lizard men appear, we can take them as minions. That is quite a good idea. There's little difference in the levels of the undead made from lizardman corpses compared to those made with human corpses. There is no need to worry about lizardman corpses if we can efficiently recover the bodies buried in Erantal. Just as Cositus was about to continue, he sensed that his master was not finished yet. The unease within his heart took material form. However, the undead I make with corpses are more economical than making use of lizard men. Not only can we be sure of their loyalty, but we will not have to worry about their care and feeding. The only advantage I can see in the lizard men is that they will naturally increase in population, and that increase will take a long time to be seen. Do tell me if I am missing anything out. Are there any sufficiently convincing advantages they possess? If Cositus could persuade his merciful master, his wish could come true. However, Cositus could not think of anything. He had always thought of himself as a weapon to be wielded by his master. As a result, he had never thought on his own account before, which was why he could not convince his master. He had not considered what to do in order to benefit the group. In addition, his master desired gains for the great underground tomb of Nazarick. Cositus did not wish to exterminate the lizard men because they had outstandingly brilliant people among them. In other words, he wished to spare the lizard men because he wanted to spare those talented individuals. That was a personal consideration, paying no heed to the bigger picture. Cositus's heart burned with anxiety. If he displeased or angered his silent master, this miraculous chance to make a suggestion would be all for naught, leaving him with the order to exterminate the lizard men. He racked his brains as hard as he could, but he could not find an answer. What's wrong, Cositus? Can't think of anything? Then it'll be extermination, no? It was the same question from before. Cositus's mind was a complete blank. His mouth felt like it weighed a ton, and his thoughts simply spun in circles. A quiet muttering filtered through the silent throne room. Really now? What a shame. Just as those words of whispered regret threatened to crush the very breath from Cositus, he was aided by a calm voice. Ainsama, please permit me to interject. What is it, Demiurge? Is something the matter? Yes. It concerns the decision you made just now, Ainsama. If it pleases you, may I be allowed to supply my humble opinion? By all means. Yes. Ainsama, I am certain you understand the importance of experiments. Therefore, should we not use the lizard men for experiments as well? Oh, now that does sound interesting. Cositus imagined that when his master leaned forward from his throne, his red eyes had met his own for a fraction of a second. Yes. To begin with, regardless of how Nazarick turns out in the end, we will ultimately need to gather various forces or exert control over various species. Your servant submits that when that time comes, there will be a great difference in the results depending on whether or not we have performed experiments in rulership. Demiurge straightened himself up further, looking his master who was seated upon his throne straight in the eye, and delivered his summation. I feel that we should take control of the Lizardman village and conduct experiments in ruling without the use of terror. The high-pitched ringing of the staff slamming into the floor echoed all around. An excellent suggestion, Demiurge. I am deeply grateful. Then, I shall make use of Demiurge's suggestion concerning the lizard men. They are not to be exterminated, but subjugated. Are there any objections? Raise your hands if there are. The crimson eyes swept across all the guardians. It seems there are none. Then it is decided. Everyone bowed in acknowledgement. That said, your suggestion was quite outstanding, Demiurge. Very impressive. Demiurge smiled. I would not dare, Ain-sama. Imagine you must have already known about that, but you were only waiting for Cositus to bring it up. His master did not answer, only smiled bitterly. However, his master's attitude said everything. Cositus felt that his body had gone slack all of a sudden. He had suffered an ignominious defeat while commanding the glorious armies of Nazarick. He had opposed his master's wishes without preparing any other alternatives to his will. How could he describe his performance? He had been incompetent. How incompetent am I, anyway? No, there's nothing of the sort, Demiurge. You praise me too highly. I was merely hoping that you would express your opinions, regardless of what they were. His master's gaze shifted again, lingering on Cositus for the longest time. He understood what his master was implying, but he could not lower his head. The most important thing is to understand the true meaning of your orders. After doing so, you must take the most appropriate action. Listen well, Guardians. Do not blindly follow orders. You must think before you act, and consider how best Nazarick can prosper from your actions. If you feel your orders are in error, or if you have a better alternative, then you must tell me or the person proposing the idea. Then Cositus, I believe I said I was going to punish you, did I not? Yes. You ordered me to exterminate the lizard men. Indeed. Now, however, we will not destroy them, but place them under our rule. As a result, I will alter your punishment. You will rule the lizard men, and you will instill a deeply rooted loyalty to Nazarick within them. You are forbidden from ruling them with fear. Instead, you will turn the lizard men into a model of rulership without terror. Cositus had never borne such a weighty responsibility before. No, among the Guardians, only Demiurge had this sort of experience. It'll be hard to complete this mission by myself. That thought appeared briefly in Cositus's mind, but how could he admit to such weakness now? He could not say such things to the compassionate ruler to whom he owed his ultimate fealty, or to the colleague who had lent him a helping hand. Understood. Have my concerns about the task, so may need to call on the aid of others, of course. In addition, this matter will require considerable resources, rations, and manpower. Nazarick will supply those. Thank you very much, Cositus. Guarantee that will show you good results, and that the mercy you have shown will not be in vain. Ain-sama, Cositus shouted. Very well. Then, I now order all the Guardians to move out. One team shall serve as distractions while another will demonstrate our power and show the lizard men that our strength is not limited to what they have seen. Of course, if you feel that may affect your future rule, I can rescind that order, Cositus. Cositus thought carefully about the matter and then replied, feel that it will not pose any problems. I see. Then, all Guardians, prepare to move out. As one, the gathered Guardians indicated their assent. Albedo, I will be heading out as well. Prepare our forces. Understood. After considering that we may have foes who enjoy spying on us, can I assume that this is intended to deceive them about our true intentions? Just so. However, do not forget that we must strike fear into the hearts of our opposition. Then, perhaps we can send out the old guard of Nazarick as the main body of our forces so they will look more impressive. Cositus agreed with Albedo's response. There was a type of undead guard called the Old Guard. The Old Guard of Nazarick were high-level undead sentries which were only found within the great underground tomb of Nazarick. They wielded weapons with all sorts of magical effects, and they were equipped with enchanted armor and shields. In addition, they possessed many refined combat skills, making them excellent undead sentries. That should be fine. How many of them are there? They number 3,000. Seems a bit too little. It'll be hard to convey the desired shock effect with those numbers. Our objective is to win a complete victory and frighten those who underestimate Nazarick. If we field fewer troops than before, it'll mean nothing, so I would like to deploy at least double the forces from the previous engagement. What other forces can we use? Then, how about mobilizing the Nazarick Elder Guards and the Nazarick Master Guards? That way we will have 6,000 people. As expected of the Guardian Overseer, Albedo replied smoothly and immediately. Ains's response was simple and clear. Excellent. Then, were there any problems when activating Gargantua? No, Ains-sama. There were no problems in its activation. Then, use Gate to send our forces over together. However, my mana might run out if I have to do it alone. Ask Pestonia to help. Have her transfer mana to you. If that's not enough, get Lupus Regina to help as well. Understood. After that, transfer Negrados in Pandora's Actor's warning grid to me. This will weaken our surveillance on Sebas. But that just means we'll need to focus on physical observation. Very well. Then, carry on, everyone. Tomorrow, we shall show the lizard men the power of the great underground tomb of Nazarick.